Welcome to Jewish Boy Calls His Mother. I'm your host, Sadia, and this is my mother, Ima. Hello, Ima.
Hello, sweetheart. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach, Chag Sameach.
Yes.
Today's episode is episode 18. It's a very auspicious number for life.
Propitious.
Propitious number.
Propitious.
It means chai. It means life. And we're also in Hanukkah, so I think it's a pretty interesting part. We're going to be talking about how
there's lots about Chabad.
Chabad. I'm trying to find ways to explain it.
Let me tell you something. I was before I even knew Chabad existed. I found out later. What happened was when I was in high school, our usual Saturday activity was, of course, shopping, and so we were driving back in a car on Saturday. We weren't observant. And my sister Ann calls out, "Look, there's a chassid on Milford Mill Road." And I looked, and sure enough, there was a man with a kapata and a beard walking along Milford Mill Road. It was like, what is he doing here? I found out later that that was one. Chabad in Baltimore has a whole history of dying and being resurrected. So it was after a number of years of Chabad not being in Baltimore, they brought it back, and this time they davened at the nursing home on Milford Mill Road. They rented that space.
Interesting.
So that's what we saw, and I found out later that the man that we saw walking later on would be the father of what I call my Shabbos family, the family that makarved me, where I spent my first Shabbosim. That was really him walking along the street.
That's
interesting.
Awesome.
You see people walking or doing whatever activities, and then it's so interesting. You see movies about this, about people not having anything to do with, not knowing who they are, like total strangers, or you see somebody walking, okay, whatever, or people walking near each other, not even, you know what I mean? Like there's no relationship or whatever. And then years later, these people meet and there's a whole relationship there.
Well, it's funny because when you watch these like romance movies and whatnot, it always happens where it's like as soon like there's a couple that breaks up and they see each other again 2 years later, like on the street randomly. And you're like, does that really happen in real life? And it seems like stories like that do happen.
Oh, it does. Yeah, there was a guy I broke up with, and I didn't realize that he worked at one of the eating places in Crown Heights. And I went into the eating place to get a cup of coffee. He had his back turned towards me. And I came up to the counter. I said, "Excuse me, sir, may I have a cup of coffee?" And the guy turned around. It was the guy I just broken up with. And went, oh.
Tough crowd. So the thing is that the Chabad movement has been around for a long time. But we're talking about Baltimore. And in Baltimore, when you became religious, there were other people that were becoming religious at the same time. There was more of like a very strong movement at the same time that you were becoming religious. Tati, my father, became religious. Everyone else in Baltimore, it seemed like, was all becoming religious. So it seems like there was a new age of Chabad in the 80s. What was that like?
Okay, the problem was, well, this is not the 80s. We're talking about the 70s now. We're talking about like around 1973, 74. And the problem at that time was there were no learning opportunities available for Baalei Tshuva, particularly female Baalei Tshuva in Baltimore. I mean, I knew I wanted to I knew I wanted to learn Torah. The question was where. So I called Near Israel. And the secretary took my call, and I told her that I was looking for some place to learn Torah. I had just, I was becoming from. And she said, well, we're closed to women. I said, I'm aware of that, but do you know of any other ways that, any other places that you can direct me? So she said, maybe Goucher.
Goucher?
Yeah, Jewish studies. Goucher.
That is the oddest thing.
And I said to her, ma'am, I said, goodbye, you don't understand what I'm referring to. And I just hung up.
Yeah.
And then after that, what I did was, there were some shiurim that they had, like Rabbi Berg had shiurim for women. So I went to a few of those. And there were some other, like there were some girls who were attending University of Maryland at the time, and they were learning with it was rabbis. I think it was Moshe Silverman in College Park. But for real learning, for Bali Tshuva, there was really nothing here in Baltimore. And there was very little social life here in Baltimore for young from single people. So the only place really to go, the best place to go was New York. That was the best place. And that's what I did. I went to New York and attended Mechon Chana.
Yeah, and that in and of itself, it can be a whole different storyline because Mechon Chana was a totally intriguing and life-changing experience. No?
Yes, well, Crown Heights, in Crown Heights, wow, they had an entire onslaught of Bali Tshuva that were coming from all over the country. I mean, you're talking about hundreds converging on this little community. And it was amazing how this, like I said, this little community was able to cater to and absorb everybody, all of them.
So in Baltimore, I guess once you got married and everything, and everyone kind of merged into one shul. I mean, the Beis Lubavitch shul originally was a merging of 5 different shuls that lost their members, and only kept the rabbis and the Sefer Torahs and the Sfarim, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. All I know is that your father and your father's side of the family, that of course you know about his, I think his mother's parents were one of the first people to join at that time the Chabad. Was it Anshe? Was it called Anshe something?
Anshe Chabad, probably.
I don't know. I forgot the name. And it was on Quantico Avenue.
Oh, yeah.
And then that died off. And then eventually it reopened. I'm trying to think where it was when I became from.
Did it reopen?
It was on Trainer Avenue. Well, when I became from, then it opened on Trainer Avenue.
Okay.
The corner of Trainer and Park Heights.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And then there was the fire.
How'd the fire start, and what was it?
The story I heard about how the fire started was that evidently it was, I think, Yuntif, I believe. They had a coffee urn, one of those hot water urns. And the water in it had come down. People didn't realize, since the electric hot water urn was something like fairly new. Usually people would just fill up a big pot of water and put it on a blecht, or put it on, on the stove for Yuntif. But then they came out with these large electric hot water urns, and people didn't realize that you can't use up all the water in that urn, because if you do, it's going to get overheated. In other words, you can't tilt it, and that's what it was. Yuntif and someone wanted, as a cup of tea or coffee, and they tilted it to try to get all the water out of it for their tea or coffee. And being Yuntif, just left it on, and it caught fire.
Wow. Weren't there like a bunch of oily rags, though?
I don't know. I don't know anything about that. All I know is that about the hot water urn. And so from then on, people were told in various publications, hey, if you have a hot water urn, on Yuntif, don't tilt it to get every single drop of water out of it. You need to leave a certain amount in there, or you will have a fire. But during the fire, there was a very interesting story that came from the fire. One of the firemen, risked his life, ran into the shul with it burning, and rescued the Sifrei Torah. He was a big, strong guy.
Wow.
And so they were interviewing him, and he said he wasn't Jewish. He says, but his wife is Jewish. And when she heard about what he did, she wow, she told him, he didn't realize what a tremendous act this was of him saving the Torahs. And until his wife said, wow, you realize what you did. And he
got
said,
some brownie points right there.
He had no idea that he had done such a heroic act.
That's awesome. That is awesome. I love stories like that. So the shul, I know, went through a different rabbanim at the time. And I think there was an election, and that's how Rabbi Lisbon came about. Am I correct?
I'm not, how can I say it? I wasn't, how can I say, I'm privy to that information. I wasn't any macher. You know, I wasn't one of these big rich machers that was on
You
the
weren't the
board
macher
or
that was
anything.
involved. It
And
was
neither was
just
your father. You know, we just paid our dues and came there and davened and participated in the activities. What happened behind the scenes? I'm not sure. I don't know. I know that there was a machlokas after the fire of who should get what, and they took it to court, and that's how they decided who should get what and what would happen. And that's after that, that's when Rabbi Kaplan started his shul on Pimlico Road, and I'm trying to think who took over. Rabbi Lisbon, I don't think Rabbi Lisbon took over yet. I think we went through a series of people that kind of like officiated. They weren't really rabbis or whatever per se, but they knew enough that they could officiate. And Rabbi Lisbon in those days had a bookstore in Silver Spring. I think, like I said, I'm not, I don't know all the ins and outs. You could probably, maybe you want to call Rabbi Lisbon, interview him. You could maybe do a podcast with him.
that would be interesting.
Don't worry, I won't be jealous.
Yeah. Yeah. No. So I'm just trying to get more information. I know then the shul hopped like 2 more times.
Then there was then after the fire trainer, we rented. There was a small, very small apartment building that was owned by a young single guy, and we rented space from him, and we moved the shul there. It was like right in the middle of Park Heights.
I remember that.
Not quite. It's somewhere between Menlo and.
It's right near the Aguda, actually.
Yeah,
it was right near the Aguda. It was like two stories,
right.
2 houses down. They just collapsed it. They're turning it right now into a Hasidic kollel. They're trying to buy one more building so they can turn that part into a parking lot, I think. But they're trying to make a giant kollel there.
Now, I remember what I remember most about that shul was your father donated my Persian carpet.
You had a Persian carpet?
Yeah, when we first got married, when we were moving into our new house in Glengall, I had always wanted a Persian carpet. I mean, this wasn't a real Persian carpet that was like thousands of dollars, 100% wool. This was a synthetic cheap knockoff. It was like
okay.
it was a couple $100, and so I fell in love with it, and we had it in our house for a few years. And then when Beis Lubavitch moved to this house on Park Heights near the Aguda, your father donated my Persian carpet to the show. But I remember Purim there very, very, very well, because for Purim, the girls dressed you up as a girl because you had beautiful strawberry blonde.
Ima, that was Yosef. I didn't.
No, you also had beautiful strawberry blonde hair as a baby.
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't remember. I was like 3.
You were a little baby, and the girls dressed you up with a little pretty bonnet. They dressed you up as a girl, and I remember carrying you into the shul for Megillah reading, and your father looking up at me as I'm coming in the door and just shaking his head like, oh no.
Well, so also there are moments when Baltimore itself was represented in Crown Heights during different times. The Rebbe had his Lag BaOmer parades.
Mm-hmm. There's a famous picture in one of the Chabad books showing your sisters carrying the banner of Chabad of Baltimore.
Yeah, but see, it's interesting is because I mean, there's the Baal Tshuva movement. I think really had an interesting moment because there were a lot of Baal Tshuvas that were struggling between the secular world and the frum world, the religious world, especially while they were raising their kids. And it's something that I feel like I wanted for us to elaborate on, because I know in my experience, and I spoke to other people that had similar experiences, where we can see that our parents were struggling, or they got very intense in different moments, because, for instance, they had to keep Shabbos or Kashrus or saying your brachas, and they were very much making it like as it was a house rule, like you have to say this in this house, and can't do this, you have to do that, and I speak to some of my friends who, were more from birth or had different experiences, more as like, well, no, they kind of taught us the ways of the importance of Judaism and how it's the light to do these things. So they kind of wound up enjoying it and continuing it with their kids. And I think the Baal Tshuva movement has that little aspect where, you know, they are very insecure with their Judaism, and they see all these other people clearly, you know, being more experienced or more educated, and it makes them feel more, you know, feel less about themselves, and then they kind of force more on their kids without realizing the repercussions.
I think what it is that, first of all, Bali Tshuva in general, sometimes, especially when you're first becoming from, you haven't established your equilibrium yet. You don't know. You're not sure of yourself. You don't know how firm you should be, how strict you should be, how lenient you should be, because this is uncharted waters, basically. And so a lot of Bali Tshuva don't quite, you know, it takes a while to establish that balance, that zone of comfortability, especially as Bali Tshuva, you don't, you know, you're afraid for your kids not following in the way that you're raising them, because you feel, you know, because it's like Judaism for you, and it really is the best thing that ever happened in your life. And, you know, you want your kid to, you know, to follow these things. And so you don't, again, you know, the problem is because since you weren't raised from, you have no standard of comparison.
Would you be more like, I guess,
you're like pioneers, you might say. It was like, it's interesting. It would be like the same thing as my grandparents when they came from Europe. America was a different culture, different language, different culture. And many of the European parents, from or not from, had a tendency to be overly strict with their children because they didn't want to see their children assimilating into, you might say, the free way of life that seemed to be part of the United States, or you might say the Goyish way, the overwhelming Goyish way of life that was part of the United States. So as Bali Tshuva, we were in a similar situation where we're adapting we're in a different culture, we're in a different lifestyle, and we're trying to adapt to it.
Well, I think also I always felt that I think that I just with you as a parent, as a Baal Tshuva, I felt that like you were scared we were going to go off the derech.
Yes,
like
you read me right.
Fear.
Yes, yeah, I'll admit it. Yeah,
and I think because the fear, I mean, I'm not a parent yet, but God willing, I will be, and I can understand that fear. But I think if you make something so good, how could you say no? Like there's an old Jackie Mason joke where it's like, why is it that when you drink a beer, it's always an acquired taste, but when you have a potato chip, there is no acquired taste? Like the whole joke of it is that if it's good, it's good. Don't worry about it. If it's bad, then you shouldn't have it in the first place. So like if it's so good, if Judaism is so good, if this movement's so good, then you should feel comfortable and confident enough to know that it's going to be fine. And I think that's why bitachon is so important. Bitachon, to those listeners who aren't familiar with it, it's
the Hebrew word for trust.
It's you have trust that this is going to be fine. It's going to work itself out. And I think that the Baal Tshuva movement needs a good trust movement where, don't worry, you know what you're doing. You know.
And also there's something else too that you pointed out, and it's so true. You said a lot of Bali Tshuva just follow whoever is responsible for carving them, just follows whatever this person advises them to do. And sometimes it's not always the best. Like I think back to some of the advice that some of the people gave me in Crown Heights who were trying to mentor me. And I realized that particular advice was not very good, that there was a better, there was a better way of now that I'm older, and I'm from, and I have a standard of comparison, that there was another way to do it. For example, there was one time I was hired to stay with this elderly woman. Her children didn't want her being alone overnight in her apartment. and this woman was not, she was Jewish, but she wasn't from. And she used to like to watch television. So I asked one of my advisors, what should I do at Shabbos when I go over there? What should I do? And this woman said to me, you tell her under no circumstances is she allowed to turn on that television. And if she does, you have to leave. So I told this woman, no, she couldn't turn on the television until after Shabbos was over. And she, of course, she wasn't happy about that. Then after a while, I had a couple other jobs, and doing this job for this elderly lady became too much for me. So I gave it over to a friend of mine who also was a Balas Tshuva, living, in Crown High School in Macon Chana, and she was a nurse. So she had a lot of experience with working with the sick and the elderly. And I asked her about, how do you handle the television? And she says, she goes, nothing. She goes, this is an elderly lady, and this is, what makes her comfortable. She says, I just sit there and I let her watch television if she wants to. And she says, and she got on really well with this woman. As a matter of fact, she said when she tucks her in at night, she gives her a kiss when she tucks her in at night.
Oh,
like, yeah. I thought back and I said, that was not good advice that my mentor gave me. This is an elderly lady, and you're in her house, and even though, you're not supposed to have TV on a Shabbos, still, this is her house.
Yeah.
And I should have just, kept my mouth shut and told her that she can do whatever, she feels comfortable doing. That's what I should have done.
I mean, I think more Balchubas nowadays, I feel like, understand that. The only reason why I guess you did it at the time is because you guys were fresh. You were the first run of this wave of Balchubas that, decide to be like, okay, I'm going to rebel against my parents and become religious. It was kind of the different times. I think people have grown and gotten better and have learned how not to,
Actually, I didn't rebel. Actually, it's it was my rebellion when I was a teenager was I became totally atheistic and and assimilated, and then started dating goyim and not eating kosher and everything. The whole 9 yards. And then when I came back from Israel, my mother was very, very thrilled at first when she saw that I was davening and I was keeping kosher and everything. And so she thought I would just go lock and step and be a good little conservative, Jew, and drive with her to shul on Shabbos.
Oh, goodness.
And so, but then when I took it a step further and I started to become religious, she didn't like that. So Aunt Ann, my older sister, who's a psychologist, said to my mother, look, you didn't like it when she was not religious. Now you don't like it that she's religious. Will you make up your mind? And then one time my mother asked my sister, since she was a psychologist, please to come to the house and observe what I'm doing and see how, quote unquote, I am forcing her to do religious things. So Aunt Ann came over on the pretext of wanting to hang out with me on Shabbos. And she just hung out in the house with me, and we were talking, just hanging out the whole day and relaxing. And at the end of the day, Aunt Ann got me and Mom together, and she sat us down, and she says, okay, and I'm going to tell you the truth. Mom asked me to come here to observe as a professional to see what you were doing and how you were interacting with her. And then Aunt Ann turns to my mother, and she says, from what I can see, Charlene, that's my English name, Charlene is just doing her own thing, minding her own business. And then she says to my mother, in my opinion, you have guilt feelings.
I honestly think a lot of times people that are really anti-religious, they just feel very guilty, like very guilty. I think at one point, we're going on a little bit too long, but at one point I was going on Mifsayim. That means like you're going on and just making sure that Jews have candles for Shabbos and if they want a calendar, nothing big, nothing crazy. And like some people would give me like a nasty look or get angry with me. I'm like, I'm doing absolutely nothing but just asking if you want a candle. That's it. Like this isn't rocket science. I'm not forcing anything down your throat. Do you want a calendar? Great. Not fantastic. Have a great day. Like I'm not pushing you. All right, that's it. That's our time. But thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Please like and share. Check us out on Facebook, and let me know what you think. All right.
Happy Hanukkah and good Shabbos to everybody.
Happy Hanukkah and have a good Shabbos. All right, love you, man.
Love you, honey. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to Jewish Boy Calls His Mother. Please like and share and find us on Facebook at Jewish Boy Calls His Mother Podcast. We are looking forward to hearing from you.